Well, hello. Today was my son's birthday. He turned 34 today. And so we're going to sing happy birthday to him. And then he always liked goosebumps when he was growing up. He would like for me to read him spooky stories. So we're going to go and read some more of our Gravedigger book. It says, strange things are happening in creepers. The Gravedigger. So first we're going to sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, you know who you are. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to everyone that had a birthday today. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, everybody. Happy birthday to you. So we're going to jump right in on chapter 2. We're on chapter 2. So, it's called Dominoes. With a loud thump, Jamie's dad dropped the book onto the desk, scattering the dust from beneath its pages in every direction. The noise it made echoed off the tall bookshelves and could be heard at the other end of the library. Shh, said the elderly man sitting at the desk across from them. It wasn't the first time the man had scolded. Andrew. Wasn't the first time the man had scolded Andrew. In fact, this was the 5th time. Andrew had made a clatter. The last time it took an angry-looking librarian to get him to quieten down. Sorry, offered Andrew, looking around at the other tables to see if anyone else was getting annoyed with him before proceeding to pull his chair noisily across the wooden library floor. Jamie and Paula tried hard not to laugh. The best Jamie could do was put his hand in front of his mouth, resulting in a loud, pig-like snorting noise, which then resulted in another shh from the man at the other table. You two be quiet. You're making too much noise, said Andrew. Us be quiet? Asked Paula incredulously. You're the one who was told to be You were the one told to quieten down. Not true, replied his father. Not true, replied her father. I was just having an adult conversation with the librarian. That's what grown-ups do. Yeah, that's right, Paula, added Jamie. Dad was having a mature conversation with the lady. Thank you, Jamie, said his father. But before he could continue, Jamie interrupted him. And then she told him to shut up or get out. It doesn't take much to make Paula laugh, and Jamie's latest remark was no exception. Forcing her to giggle out loud and turn heads all over the library, once again bringing another shh from the other table and yet another apology from her dad. When can we go home? Jamie asked his dad, almost pleading with him. When I've found what I'm looking for, his dad replied sternly. Well, what is it exactly that you're looking for? Asked Paula, trying very hard to sound helpful. But like Jamie, she was also desperate to get home. I'm looking for something suspicious about our new house, some record or ghastly encounter or details of a ghostly past, said her father, trying his best to involve them. Now Paula was beginning to pay more attention. Do you think there could be dead bodies buried at our house? Gee, let me think, answered Jamie. We live in a house in the middle of a graveyard. You know, Paula, I think you could be right. I think if we look hard enough, we might find some dead bodies buried somewhere. Paula hated it when Jamie made her look silly. It was something Jamie liked to do to his little sister at every opportunity. Jamie, stop poking fun at your sister, his father said. Do something useful and start looking through those old newspaper clippings. Jamie really didn't want to, but in the end decided to help, if only to get home quicker. The hours passed with Jamie, his father, and his sister searching through history books, flicking through newspaper clippings, and looking into the history of some of the people buried in the graveyard. But it was all for nothing. No horrific history, no ghastly past, no tales of ghosts or anything being haunted. Nothing. Jamie's father slammed the final history book closed, forcing dust from beneath its cover and straight up his nose. He tried hard to contain a sneeze that somehow managed to sneeze between both of his hands and out into the cold air of the library. Jamie and Paula were both sleeping with their heads on the desk, having given up on ever finding anything remotely spooky. "Jamie, wake up," said his father, trying hard to shout a whisper. "Jamie, wake up!" Jamie raised his head from the desk. His hair was flat on one side of his head, and his eyes barely opened as he whispered back, "What is it?" "What did you find?" "Nothing," replied his father, "but it's time to go home. They're closing the library for the night." Jamie gave Paula a shake to wake her up, but Paula was so exhausted she hardly felt a thing. Instead, she just rolled her head to one side, making a loud grunting noise as Jamie continued to shake her and pull her hair. He eventually managed to wake her by slamming an encyclopedia onto the desk just inches from her head. As they made their way to the exit, the librarian was already holding the door open, waiting for them to leave. "Thank you," said Andrew as they passed through the doorway. "You're welcome," replied the librarian, obviously glad to see Jamie and his family leaving. "Will you be back tomorrow?" she asked politely. No. I think we managed to look at everything we needed to." Andrew holding the door open for Jamie and Paula as they walked out into the cold night air. Jamie remembered that it had been daylight when they went into the library, and now his father had claimed that it wouldn't take him long. Jamie looked at his watch and realized that it was nearly 6 hours ago. The house looked spooky enough during the day, but at night it looked even scarier. As Jamie's dad drove into the driveway, the wind seemed stronger and to blow the leaves that had fallen from the trees high into the air. Paula zipped her jacket up and prepared to get out of the car and step into the freezing wind that was howling and whistling all around them. Jamie looked up at the leaves that were blowing wildly into the dark night sky. Even the trees look evil, he thought as he jumped out of the car and ran to the front door of the house. The door creaked open, loud and slow, and one by one, Jamie, his sister, and his father emerged from behind it into the hallway of the house. And their dad pushed the door closed. Some leaves blew inside and came to rest in front of Paula's feet. "You two go upstairs and get into your pajamas. I'll make some hot chocolate. That sounds good, said their dad. Jamie and Paula had just begun to climb the long, spiraling staircase when they heard Father shout to them from the kitchen, "Jamie, Paula, come here for a second." "What now?" muttered Paula, as she and Jamie turned and made their way back downstairs. In the kitchen, Count Vania, Mummy, Wolfie, and Lex sat around the table. Jamie had seen this before. It meant it was conference time. Either they had already done something or they were about to. It didn't take long to find out that it was the former. "We didn't mean any harm," exclaimed Count Vania. "We were just having some fun." "It's true," continued Lex Killen. "We were just playing a game. It was an accident." "What exactly happened?" asked Andrew. "Well, you know how to play the game leapfrog?" asked Wolfie. "Yes, of course," said Paula. "Well, it's kind of like that, only we weren't jumping over each other," said Wolfie. "So what exactly were you jumping over?" questioned Jamie. "Gravestones," came a muffled answer from Mummy. "Gravestones?" yelled Andrew. "What were you thinking?" Wolfie started to get upset. "It was his fault," he said, pointing to Mummy. "We were all having fun until clumsy Clogs tried it and fell over his bandages straight into one." "Well, if you knocked one over, I guess I have to be the one that picks it up," said Andrew angrily. "Well, it wasn't just one," Count Vania interrupted. "So how many was it?" Jamie asked. "I think the final figure was somewhere in the region of 23. Stuttered Lex. 23. "How on earth did you manage to knock over 23 gravestones?" yelled Andrew. "It was a bit like when you put lots of dominoes close together in a line and then push one over," muttered Mummy sheepishly. "Did anyone see you?" Paula asked. The four of them looked at each other with blank expressions. The truth was, none of them noticed if they were being watched, so they couldn't be sure. "I think the four of you should keep a very low profile the next couple of days," bellowed Andrew. "Don't you?" "Yes," came their murmured, half-hearted replies. "And I think you should start right now," said Andrew. One by one, they stood up from the table, disappeared through the wall, apologizing as they went. Jamie looked at Paula. "It's been a long night," he said. "Yep," Paula replied, "and I've got a funny feeling we haven't heard the last of this." Chapter 3. We haven't read in a while, so we're going to do chapter 3 as well. It starts on page 28. That's 5 less numbers than how many gravestones they've got to put back up. The events of the previous night did not pass unnoticed the next day. Everyone in the house seemed to be on edge, as though they were expecting something to happen. The 4 culprits hadn't shown their faces around the house, obviously keeping a low profile as requested. Jamie was in the living room watching TV, and his dad was in the kitchen standing over a sink full of dirty dishes. He seemed a million miles away as he stood gazing out the window with a strange look on his face. By the sound of things, Paula was upstairs practicing her dance routines. The loud banging and thumping of her dancing around her room could be heard in every room downstairs. Jamie stood up and walked to the window. Outside it was a gray day with no real hint of sunshine breaking through the dark clouds that seemed to hang over the graveyard. Every time Jamie looked out the window, he got the feeling that somewhere out among the moss-covered headstones and dark, overhanging trees, someone was watching him. Great, thought Jamie. Even during the day, this place gives me the creeps. As he turned and walked away from the window, the sound of the doorbell echoed throughout the house. Even Paula heard it over the thumping of her music. That's weird, thought Jamie. To get to the front door, you have to walk past the window. I was just standing there and never saw anyone come through the gate. Could someone get the door, please? Yelled Andrew from the kitchen. I'll get it, Paula shouted as she came running down the stairs 2 at a time. Jamie and Paula liked to compete with each other at everything. No matter how silly the task was, one of them had to be the quickest or the smartest or the funniest, just to be better than the other one. However, this time, Paula was certainly going to win the race to answer the door because Jamie remained still. Not sure of what might be standing on the other side of the door, Paula jumped down the last few stairs and reached the door. I got here first, she said, turning to make sure Jamie heard her. Jamie remained in the living room as Paula heaved open the large wooden front door. A tall, thin man was standing in the doorway. Paula's head was directly in line with the man's waist. And slowly, her eyes started to climb upwards. That's what she saw. Her eyes started to climb upward, so she's looking at the full figure of this person. The man was wearing chunky black boots that were caked with mud. His black pants were patched at the knees and tucked inside his boots. From what she could see of his sweater, it was dirty and frayed at the bottom. But it was difficult to see because the man was wearing a long black coat that reached the top of his knees and smelled awful. As Paula looked up at the stranger's face, it was difficult to see it because he was wearing a black hat that cast a shadow over his face. The man bent down towards Paula, coming close to her face. The man, he's close to her face, and she saw that he had very pale skin, almost ghostly and thin, pointy nose with big nostrils. Paula felt a shiver run down her spine. Is your father here? He asked Paula, so close to her face she could feel his warm breath on her cheeks, smell his bad breath in her nose, and see the yellow stains on his teeth. Who's at the door? Yelled Andrew from the kitchen. It's someone for you, Dad, Paula replied, taking a step back from the stranger. Jamie walked to the front door. At the same time, his father walked from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel before handing it to Jamie to hold for him. Allow me to introduce myself, said the man to Andrew. My name is Ebenezer Krim. Paula looked at Jamie. It was one of the few occasions that Jamie could remember seeing fear in her face. Nice to meet you. I'm Andrew Price, said Andrew politely. I'm the gardener for the graveyard, Mr. Krim continued. How did you reach the front door? Interrupted Jamie. I walked straight up the path past the window, Mr. Krim said. You couldn't have, Jamie replied. Didn't you see me? Mr. Krim replied. I saw you. The thought that this strange-looking man had been watching Jamie without him knowing made Jamie's blood run cold. Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee? Asked Andrew. Jamie looked at his dad in disbelief. What on earth was he doing inviting this man into their home? I'd love a coffee, Mr. Krim replied. Jamie, run into the kitchen and get some coffee for Mr. Krim, said his father. Ebenezer Krim stepped inside the hallway, stamping his feet on the rug, knocking off large clumps of dried mud. As Jamie's dad closed the door behind him with a loud thud. As Mr. Krim made his way into the sitting room, Jamie pulled his dad back by the arm. Dad, I don't know what it is about that man, but something isn't right, he whispered. His father seemed annoyed with him. Be careful, he said. Mr. Krim might hear you. Why did you invite him in? Jamie asked. Well, I don't know if you're seeing something. I'm not, but the man seems perfectly nice to me, his father replied. But he's lying. He never passed by the window. Jamie started to get frustrated with his father. To him, it was obvious that Mr. Krim was a very strange man. Jamie, if he didn't pass you at the window, how else could he have walked up to the front door? His father asked. I don't know, said Jamie. That's what's so spooky about him. I've heard enough, said his father sternly. There's nothing wrong with Mr. Krim. You hardly even know the man. But, Jamie said, trying to interrupt. No buts, continued his father. Go and pour Mr. Krim a cup of coffee like I asked. Then come and join the rest of us in the sitting room. Jamie didn't argue. He knew his father couldn't be talked into agreeing with him. Instead, Jamie headed off to the kitchen to do what his father had asked. A few minutes later, Jamie emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with coffee for his dad and Mr. Krim and hot chocolate for him and Paula. As he walked into the living room, he could see his father was sitting on one chair and Paula on the other. Great, he thought. Now I'll have to sit beside Mr. Krim on the couch. Jamie set the tray down on the table and chose the seat on the other end of the couch for Mr. Krim as his dad handed Mr. Krim his coffee. Mr. Krim cleared his throat and began to speak. You know, some people around here say things about me that aren't really true. They like to spread rumors. Really? Said Andrew. Yes, continued Mr. Krim. They only say these things because they don't really know me. It's mainly the kids. They call me spooky or weird. I can't imagine why, said Jamie, trying hard to sound sincere when he really didn't want to. His dad gave him a look that told him to be quiet. Ebenezer Krim seemed to not notice and continued. A lot of the time, the kids say things to hide their own guilt. What do you mean? Asked Andrew. Well, sometimes they'll do something they shouldn't have, something bad, then tell lies about me so that I get the blame and get out of trouble. They'll tell lies about me so that I get the blame and they get out of trouble. That's terrible, replied Andrew. I know, which brings me to the reason I'm visiting you. Last night we had a bit of trouble in the graveyard. Jamie and Paula both looked at each other, dreading what Mr. Krim was going to say next. Some headstones were knocked over, he continued. How many? Asked Andrew, trying hard to act as if he didn't know. There were 23 in total. Excuse me. There were 23 in total, replied Mr. Krim. Where exactly were your kids last night, Mr. Price? He asked suspiciously. My kids? Said Andrew, a little confused by the question. Jamie and Paula were at the library with me all night. And what time did you get home? Mr. Krim continued, looking at Jamie and Paula with his piercing eyes. I really don't like what you are trying to say, Mr. Krim, said Andrew. Neither do I, continued Jamie. Paula remained silent. My kids were with me all night. Andrew went on, and at no time did they leave my sight. So it wasn't them that pushed the headstones over. Ebenezer Krim didn't say anything. There was a long silence that made Jamie, Andrew, and Paula very uncomfortable. Mr. Krim just sat staring at everyone, his eyes slowly moving from Andrew to Paula to Jamie. Eventually, he turned his gaze back to Paula. It was you, wasn't it? It was you, wasn't it? He yelled. Paula looked frightened as she sat on the chair, not saying anything. I think you should leave, shouted Andrew to Mr. Krim. I think you should leave. We've all heard enough. Mr. Krim appeared not to hear him. His eyes and attention were fixed on Paula. You did it for fun, didn't you? He said to her. No, I didn't, replied Paula, and anyway, it was an accident. Jamie winced. Aha! Mr. Krim yelled triumphantly. So you did do it. Paula started to get very angry. Jamie shouted at Mr. Krim, leave her alone. But again, Mr. Krim ignored him. I told you to leave, said Andrew. Why did you do it? Mr. Krim snarled at Paula. I told you I didn't, she yelled back. Well, who was it then? Your brother? Paula couldn't take any more. No, it wasn't Jamie either. It was the ghosts. She shouted at Mr. Krim. The room fell into silence. Ghosts, Mr. Krim said with a smirk on his face. Are you trying to tell me evil ghosts knocked the headstones over? They're not bad ghosts. They're good ghosts. And more importantly, they're our friends. Paula, be quiet, Jamie yelled at her. Paula, be quiet. Mr. Krim looked around the room. The look on their faces made him believe that Paula was telling the truth. I told you to leave, Mr. Krim, Andrew said. Ebenezer Krim did not reply. He stood up, put his cup on the table, and made his way to the front door. As he reached the front door, he turned to Jamie's father. Believe me when I say this, Mr. Price. This is not the last you will hear from me, he said before slamming the door closed behind him. Everyone in the living room sat in silence, thinking about what had just happened. Now, Ebenezer Krim knew their secret. Andrew looked at both Jamie and Paula and said, We all need to talk. I think this is just the beginning of our trouble with Mr. Krim. We're also going to read Chapter 4, Kitchen Table Conference. We're going to read 3 chapters tonight. 3 chapters tonight. 3. Chapter 4, Kitchen Table Conference. This is not good, said Count Vania. There were more than a few concerned faces around the kitchen table, and they weren't all human. Jamie's father had just filled them in on what happened the day before when Ebenezer Krim paid them a visit, and now the ghosts were beginning to realize just how costly their game of headstone leapfrog might prove to be. As always, when something important needed to be discussed, everyone would gather around the kitchen table. "This is all my fault," muttered Mummy through a face full of raggedy bandages. "No, it isn't," said Jamie. "It's no one's fault. Accidents happen." "Yeah, but if I hadn't let the cat out of the bag, we wouldn't be in this mess," whined Paula. Andrew put a comforting arm around her. "Jamie's right, Paula," he said. "No one's to blame for any of this. These things happen. We've just got to figure out a way to get out of this." Everyone agreed. "I think the best plan of action would be to simply seek out this Krim chap and apologize," said Lex Killen. "I think it's too late for that," Jamie replied. "Mr. Krim seemed really angry when he left." Andrew agreed. "I think Ebenezer Krim wants everyone to know that he wasn't to blame for the headstones being knocked over," said Jamie. "So what do we do then?" asked Wolfie. "I think the only thing we can do is wait and see what happens," replied Andrew. "Mr. Krim said it wouldn't be the last he would hear from him. He's found out some information about us, so it's up to him now to decide what he wants to do with it." Paula got up from the table and started pacing the floor. Something was obviously on her mind. "What's wrong, Paula?" said Jamie. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "What if the other kids in my class find out that we hang out with ghosts? They would want to talk to me. They'll all think they won't want to talk to me. They'll all think that I'm creepy." "They probably think that already," said Jamie. "That's not funny," Paula retorted. Sometimes Jamie would make jokes at the wrong time, and this was the wrong time. "There's no point in worrying about it, Paula," Andrew said. "We don't know what's going to happen." "Why don't I go to Mr. Krim's house and scare the living daylights out of him?" suggested Wolfie. "Because there might be mirrors in his house, and you'll end up more scared than him," replied Count Vania. "Well, we've got to do something," said Jamie. "We can't just sit here and wait for him to go and tell the police or something." "I don't think anyone would believe him anyway," muttered Mummy. Lex Killen tried to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, some salt water squirted out straight into Andrew's coffee mug. "Oh, I'm frightfully sorry," he said. Jamie's dad emptied the cup down the sink and smiled. "Forget about it," he said. "I wouldn't be so sure that no one will believe him," added Lex Killen. "When you think about it, it does sound a bit odd." "What do you mean?" asked Andrew. "Well, look at it the way other people will look at it. You bought a house in the middle of a graveyard. It's quite a spooky thing to do. The others wanted to disagree, but knew that Lex Killen was right. Lex was right. And the head of the family writes horror novels for a living, continued Lex. For the first time since they all sat down, the kitchen was silent. Lex had made everyone realize that Mr. Krim could make things really difficult for them in town. I think the best thing would be for the four of us to find somewhere else to hang around, said Count Vania. His words seemed very loud in the silence of the kitchen. Even though he rarely raised his voice above a whisper. I think you're right, agreed Wolfie. If we go now, things might not be so bad with Mr. Krim. No, shouted Jamie in a panic. We don't want you to go. We want you to stay here with us. Jamie hardly ever lost his cool. He wasn't the type that scared easily or panicked. In fact, it took an awful lot to scare Jamie. But the look on his face told everyone at the table that he was scared his ghost friends would leave him for good. I'm with you, Jamie, on this one, added Andrew. We've got to stick together. You guys are part of our family, so we want you to stay. Will you stay? Paula asked. Slowly, one by one, Count Vania, Wolfie, Mummy, and Lex Killen nodded their heads. Although they never said it, Jamie could tell they were glad they could stay. We have to tread very carefully for the next few days, said Andrew. So here's what we have to do. Jamie sat forward at the table, as did everyone else, waiting to hear what his father had to say. Hauntings, for the time being, there are to be no more hauntings. Wolfie, if you want a veggie burger, we'll get it for you. Don't go near the store. No problem, replied Wolfie. Andrew continued, Mummy, you'll have to stay away from the ancient Egyptian museum. But I go there to visit my cousins, he protested. I know, replied Andrew, but we can't risk anyone catching a glimpse of any of you. The same goes for you, Count Vania and Lex. Count Vania nodded his head, and while Lex clasped his head between both his hands, nodded, and then placed his head back on the table. As Jamie's dad continued with his instructions for the rest of the family, Ebenezer Krim stood outside watching them. Long after Count Vania and the rest of the ghosts had gone, Ebenezer still stood outside the house in the dark. He hadn't moved once. He just stood there in the pouring rain staring into the house. It wasn't until Andrew's bedroom light went off that Mr. Krim turned and walked away. As he trudged through the mud, he turned and whispered, Tomorrow I'm going to make you pay. I'm going to make you all pay for what you have done. Just you wait. So we're going to leave off there. And we'll begin with chapter 5 next time. And I'm not going to tell you the title because it might give something away. So we'll continue tomorrow on chapter 5. So I hope you enjoyed this story so far. And so I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.